My whole world fell apart when my family and fiancé cut me off after my sister set me up. I have no idea what to do anymore, and I could really use some advice. I was just 21 when my fiancé Jason proposed to me. He was everything to me, my best friend, my first love. We had grown up together since preschool, and our families were practically one. He was over at our house for dinner nearly every night, just like I spent time with his family. Jason was an only child, but I had two older sisters, Madeline and Rachel. They were important to him too, almost like the siblings he never had. When Jason and I started dating, I swear our parents were on cloud nine. They celebrated like they had just won the lottery. He helped me through a lot of my struggles, especially my anxiety. Even when I put on some weight and my mother went off about how Jason would leave me for someone better, he shut her down. He told her he loved me for who I was, not for my appearance, and that to him I was the most beautiful woman in the world. We were engaged for only 6 months when my entire life turned upside down. My middle sister Madeline was always cold, distant. She barely showed affection to anyone. The only person she ever truly opened up to was Jason. She always said she saw him as a brother, and he had been there for her through some of her darkest days when she was fighting drug addiction, getting into trouble with the law. She and I never really got along. I loved her because she was my sister, but as a person, I could not stand her. One day, out of nowhere, she suggested we go out clubbing together. She said she felt bad that we were not close and wanted to change that. I agreed, thinking maybe she was finally making an effort. That night, we hit the club. It was not really my thing, but after a few drinks, I started feeling more relaxed, even having a little fun. Everything was going fine until Madeline spotted some guy across the room and made some comment about how she wanted to climb him like a tree. She walked over to him, chatted for a few minutes, and came back with a sour look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, but she would not say anything at first. I kept pushing because I did not want her night to be ruined. Eventually, she told me the guy had no interest in her, he wanted my number instead. I laughed and told her the guy was a waste of time, that there were plenty of men who would love to be with a girl like her. But she barely reacted. Instead, she said she needed to use the restroom and then we would head home. I waited and waited. An entire hour passed and she never came back. Meanwhile, I kept drinking, sampling different cocktails, and before I knew it, my head was spinning. I felt lightheaded and knew it was time to call it a night. I assumed Madeline had already left, so I decided to go home alone. On my way out, I bumped into a guy named Eric, someone Madeline had dated briefly. He asked if I needed help getting to my car, and I told him I was taking a cab. He said he was leaving too and offered to share one. It seemed harmless, so I agreed. We walked outside and got into the first cab we saw. As I rummaged through my purse to find my phone, the dizziness got worse. The last thing I remember is feeling the whole world tilt around me. Then nothing. When I woke up, my head was pounding. I was lying on a stiff couch in an unfamiliar living room. It took me a moment to realize I was at Eric's place. My phone was on the glass coffee table in front of me, but it was completely dead. Eric noticed I was awake and brought me some water and painkillers. He explained that I had passed out in the cab, and since he did not know my parents' address, he brought me to his place and let me sleep it off. I told him I needed to get home, that Jason was probably worried sick. He called a cab for me, and I left. As soon as I walked through the door at my parents' house, I knew something was wrong. My mom, dad, Jason, Madeline, and Jason's parents were all standing in the living room, their faces tense. I thought they had been worried about me, but before I could say a word, Jason demanded to know how I could do this to him. Confused, I asked what he meant, but he was already yelling, accusing me of cheating. I was stunned. Why would he even think that? I tried to explain, but no one was listening. Madeline jumped in, acting all heartbroken, saying she saw me flirting with guys all night. Then she said she saw me leave with Eric when she came back from the restroom. I tried to correct her, but then she pulled out her phone and showed a picture. It was me, walking out of the club with Eric's hand on my lower back, guiding me to the cab. It did not look good, and I had been too drunk to even notice at the time. Jason lost it. His mom was crying. My mom was crying. I begged Madeline to call Eric so he could clear things up. She did, but when he answered, he told an entirely different story. He claimed I had begged him to take me to his place and that we had slept together multiple times. I felt my entire world collapse in that moment. I started shouting at Madeline, knowing she had set this up, but Jason just shook his head, his face full of anger and hurt. Then he turned and walked out. The moment he was gone, my mother slapped me across the face and told me to leave. I packed what little I could and went to crash at a friend's place. I spent the next few nights calling Jason, texting him, pleading with him to believe me. He never responded. My mother texted me only once to tell me she was throwing all my belongings out and that she never wanted to see me again. She sent some truly hateful words, things I never thought I would hear from my own mother. With nowhere to go and no family willing to take me in, I was suddenly alone, homeless, engaged one day, abandoned the next, all because of Madeline's lies. For weeks, I tried to fix things, but the breaking point came around Christmas. I went to my parents' house, hoping to at least talk things through, to try and make things right. But when I knocked, nobody answered. Then my friend called me, her voice full of pity. She had just seen something on Facebook. My family was out of town, celebrating the holidays. They had posted pictures. Everyone was there, my sisters, my parents, my grandparents, Jason and his family too, but not me. Seeing those pictures broke something inside me. They all looked so happy, like I had never even existed. I cried for days, then finally made the decision to block every single one of them. I even mailed back my engagement ring. A friend of mine knew someone a few hours away who needed help in his restaurant. He had a small apartment above the place, cheap rent, and a job opening. I packed up what little I had left and left town. I had to start over. I had no choice. I had no family, no home, no fiancé. I had nothing but the determination to survive. It did not take long for me to adjust to my new life. The apartment was tiny, the hours at the restaurant were brutal, sometimes over 10 hours a day, but I was finally making my own way. Little by little, I saved up enough money to move out of that cramped little place and into a much nicer condo. I stayed at the restaurant, working my way up to assistant manager. Life was far from easy, but at least I was standing on my own 2 feet. For 2 years, I had no contact with my family. No texts, no calls, no letters. As far as I knew, they had written me off for good, just like I had written them off. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I froze. It was my ex-fiancé, Brandon. I had not seen him since that awful night, since he walked away from me without a second thought. For a brief moment, my heart leaped, but then reality came crashing down. I tried to slam the door in his face, but he stopped it with his hand. He asked me to listen, to just hear him out. He said my sister Madeline had come clean about everything. She had gotten married and, in some moment of twisted self-reflection, confessed that she had set me up, that she had lied about everything. I could barely process what I was hearing. Brandon told me my whole family had been trying to reach me, that they wanted to see me. I just shook my head. I told him I needed time, that I did not even know if I wanted him in my life after what he had done. He left, and I was left a complete mess. A few days later, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was my parents. They wanted to meet. I ignored it, thinking I would rather do it over a video call, where I had the option to hang up if things got ugly. But before I could set that up, someone knocked on my door again. This time it was my father. The second I saw him, I felt sick to my stomach. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. He stood awkwardly in my apartment while I cleaned myself up, insisting on wiping down the floor like that was somehow going to fix everything. When I sat down, I completely lost it. Tears, memories, everything came flooding back. He smelled the same cologne he had worn for years. It made everything feel like a sick dream. He tried to hug me, but I pulled away and asked him what the hell he was doing here. That was when he dropped the bomb and my mother were getting divorced. He told me he had begged my mom to reach out to me after I left, but she refused. She said I was acting like a child, and that if I wanted to leave, then I could do everything on my own. I asked him how long it had taken them to even realize I was gone. He said they had come back home after New Year's and planned to reach out to me, but by then, my friend had told them I had already left town. I looked him dead in the eyes and asked why he never listened to me, why he threw me away so easily. He broke down crying, saying he never meant for it to go that far, that he regretted everything. But I did not let him off that easy. I said, "When you found out Madeline was addicted to drugs and dropped out of high school, you did not throw her away. You took her on vacation to clear her mind. And when she got hooked on alcohol instead, you still defended her, every time, over and over." He shook his head and swore he had no idea my mother planned to kick me out. He thought it was temporary, that she would let me come back after the holidays. Apparently, she had promised him that. Then, last minute, they decided to spend Christmas somewhere else. I scoffed. She threw away all my stuff. He sighed. She lied about that. It is all still there. I asked about Madeline. My father shook his head and said she was dead to him. He wanted nothing to do with her. But my mother? She had been begging him to forgive her, saying she was not well and that they had already lost one daughter, they could not lose two. He told me he had blocked both my mother and Madeline, but before he did, he had pressured Brandon into finding me. That was how my ex had tracked me down. I told him he was not welcome to show up unannounced ever again unless I gave him permission. He agreed. Then he asked what was going to happen now. I sighed. I do not know. You hurt me, bad. I let it all out how much pain I had been in, what it felt like to be erased from my own family, how hard it had been. By the end, we were both crying. As much as I wanted to hate him, part of me was relieved to get everything off my chest. He said he could help me find a nicer place, a better job, but I shut that down fast. My boss had been the only one who had my back, and I was not about to leave my job after everything he had done for me. I told my father I was willing to try and reconcile, but it had to be on my terms, and it was going to take a long, long time before I could ever trust him again. If I ever could, then I asked him straight up, why did Madeline do this? Apparently, she had told him she thought Brandon deserved someone better than me. She wanted him to be happy, said he was making too many sacrifices for me. She had planned the whole thing, had her friend take me out of the club so she could snap pictures, make it look like I was cheating. Nothing ever happened though. I passed out on the couch, and her friend was up playing video games all night. He even had proof. My father had planned to bring me my stuff from my mother's house, but I told him to throw it all away. I did not want anything from that place anymore. Then I asked about Madeline's husband. My father said my mother had kept everything quiet, but he had the guy's number. He wrote it down for me. After my dad left, I stared at that number for a long time before finally calling. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. What if she was there? What if I heard her voice in the background? When he answered, I blurted out everything, no filter. I regretted it the second I did, but it was too late. He sounded confused. So I went over it again, explaining the whole situation, her lies, her addictions, everything. I braced myself for him to yell at me, to defend her. Instead, he let out a deep, tired sigh. Turned out, he already had suspicions. Apparently, she had been causing problems between him and his sister, spreading lies, turning them against each other. His own sister had refused to attend their wedding because of Madeline. I told him I was sorry, but that he should make things right with his sister. The problem was not Harriet, it was Madeline. We talked a little longer, then he hung up. I do not know what he is going to do, but I hope he leaves her. He seemed like a good guy, and she had already ruined so much for him. As for me, I decided to move forward with reconciling with my father. My mother? I doubt I will ever forgive her. She still sees Madeline as the victim, and I am done listening to her excuses. If she reaches out, I will decide then. Brandon? I have not met with him yet. My father said he wanted to come with him when they first visited, but my dad told him it would be too much for me to handle, and honestly, he was right. Apparently, Brandon was arrested for beating up Madeline's friend, the one who lied about everything. He was facing charges, but they were dropped after a few days. I do not know what I am going to do, but when I figure it out, I will let you know. Thank you for listening. This story has been buried inside me for far too long.